So now that every children's TV show from the early 2000s is available on a streaming service, there's been a whole cycle of long-form media analysis and or recaps of these shows. And what is interesting about this is that Hi Gus. Don't drink my tea, please. And what is interesting about this is that in adult television, this era is typically known as the golden era of television because it had a lot of quality TV shows like Mad Men and Breaking Bad and The Wire. I think the popularity of these shows right now has less to do with their actual quality and more to do with the fact that the kids who grew up watching them are now adults and able to articulate their love and nostalgia for these shows. Kind of similar to the only 90s kids remember trend from like 10 years ago, except less gatekeepy because we can all acknowledge like reruns and streaming services. So anyway, I waited for a YouTube video about my favorite 2000s Nickelodeon show about Australian mermaids, and then I realized that no one else is going to say what I have to say about the show. No one else can talk about why I loved it, and no one's going to have the same experience as me because at the end of the day, I'm no ordinary girl. So without further ado, let's take a deep dive into
the rise and fall of H2O Just Add Water.
H2O Just Add Water is an Australian children's television show that aired on Nickelodeon from 2006 to 2010. The show featured 3 teenage girls living in a coastal city in Australia who turn into mermaids anytime they touch water. The show was an obsession of mine as a kid, and even as an adult, I still rewatch a few episodes every summer. But even outside of die-hard fans like myself, a lot of people saw a resurgence in the show's popularity when it became a meme on TikTok last year.
Leo, the bathroom's free. Oh no, the condensation! Emma!
With TikTokers making fun of the show's strong accents and dramatic plot points.
Cleo, can you pass the Sprite? Oh no. Oh no. Go!
But it's precisely those elements that makes the show stand out from a lot of other shows. The show's technical style, such as its cinematography and its lighting and its editing, as well as the serialized narrative plot points, drive it towards a more mature, quality TV style than most other children's shows at the time. So aside from the fact that it was like the one popular Nickelodeon show that wasn't a Dan Snyder show, when we look back on it, we can see why this show is so different from any other Nickelodeon content from the early 2000s. The basic premise of the show is that it follows 3 teenage girls as they traverse normal high school issues while also keeping a secret that they turn into mermaids anytime they touch water. Their powers are linked to a dormant volcano called Mako Island, and anytime anyone sits in the moon pool, which is like a pool at the base of the volcano, while the full moon is directly overhead, they turn into mermaids.
Wow, spooky.
In addition to growing a long orange tail and a halter bikini top anytime they touch water, the girls also have mermaid powers that correspond to their personality traits. The 3 main characters are Cleo, Emma, and Rikki. Cleo is kind of the show's pseudo main character. She's the one that's in the center of all the promotional photos, and she's the one whose family we get to know the best. I've read in interviews that Cleo was supposed to be the peacemaker of the group, but I think that Cleo's primary characteristic is being the most immature and childish and often acting as the audience proxy in a lot of situations. She's also often portrayed as childish and a little bit clueless with her pink and floral wardrobe and her often whiny demeanor.
This isn't hot chocolate. This is lukewarm chocolate. They should say lukewarm chocolate on the menu if that's what they're going to serve. Thanks, Rikki. Ow.
It's also because of Cleo that the girls even become mermaids in the first place.
I can't do this. It's too slippery. There's got to be another way.
Cleo's power is her ability to move and manipulate water with her hands. Her love interest, Lewis, is the first to find out that the girls are mermaids and often tries to like mansplain their issues to them. Like he views himself as like the scientist and he's gonna find the reasons that everything is happening to them, but it often ends up making the situations way worse than they already are. Emma is the type A brainiac of the group. She's always thinking the most rationally, and prior to being a mermaid, she was a competitive swimmer. She's often the person who thinks the most logically and responsibly and tries to solve problems directly.
Emma's always really prepared.
I'm so happy for her.
Whenever Emma begins acting irresponsibly because of a full moon or because of a weird mermaid infection, it's often a big problem. Emma's mermaid power is ice. Mimicking her rigid, strong personality, she's able to freeze water by just making a stop sign with her hand. Rikki is the opposite of Emma and objectively the best character in the entire series. I mean, just look at the way her character is introduced in the pilot. When Cleo, who prior to being a mermaid didn't know how to swim, gets cast off by Zane in a motorboat that is missing some piece of motorboat technology, she's yelling for help when out of nowhere, Rikki bursts into the screen, reveals that she orchestrated the whole thing just so that she could take the boat out for a ride with her friends. Rikki doesn't play by the rules. She has a lot of sarcastic comments and she's often driven by passion or anger. She also frequently wears red compared to Emma's blue outfits and often makes sarcastic comments as comedic relief to Cleo's anxiety.
What if we can't call anyone? What if nobody finds us?
We'll have to draw straws and decide which one of us the others will eat.
Alongside her fiery personality, Rikki is able to boil water by clenching her hand. Rikki's love interest is Zane, with whom she has a on-again, off-again, enemies to lovers relationship.
We're stuck, okay? Maybe we can pretend not to hate each other for just a few minutes.
Fine.
A few minutes later.
The two most important sources of magic in the show are the full moon and Mako Island. Early in the show, Mako Island is portrayed as this dangerous place that no one goes to because it's infested by sharks, but later on it's just kind of a place where people hang out and do science projects and camping and stuff. The full moon itself is a big deal for mermaids. Much like werewolves, whenever a mermaid sees a full moon, they go under a moon spell and start acting out of character and doing weird things with their powers. The magic of Mako Island is highly dependent on the full moon and can change depending on the alignments of the planets. For example, season 2 begins with a special full moon that elevates the girls' powers so that Rikki can cause lightning strikes, Cleo can move the wind, and Emma can freeze an entire room by accident, but I don't actually think that that's a step up from her power before, because in season 1 there's an episode where Emma accidentally freezes an entire room, including a person who she freezes like Kristen Stewart in Zathura style. In later episodes, it's revealed that if the planets are in a certain alignment, then the moon pool can actually take away mermaid powers and turn them back into humans. Season 2 of the show was greenlit while season 1 was still filming, but season 3 was a surprise and didn't air until 2009, which is 2 years after the last season.
As a result, season 3 had a few notable differences from the rest of the show.
For one, Claire Holt, who plays Emma, left the show so that she could shoot a horror movie called Messengers 2: The Scarecrow. Emma was subsequently replaced by Bella, who has been a mermaid since she was a little kid and is able to turn water into like a gelatinous form, but also sometimes in like a glass-like form. It's not super clear, but there's more change than just that. Season 3 is, for all intents and purposes, the college years season of the show. The characters are still in high school and they're shown to be in high school multiple times, and the season ends with them graduating high school. But there's a lot of stuff about the show that doesn't make sense if they are still in high school. For example, the Juice Net Cafe that they all hung out at and that Emma worked at in the previous seasons has been closed for ages.
It's been closed for ages.
Which doesn't make sense because they're still in high school and they were in high school before, so it couldn't have been ages since it closed. And Zane buys the cafe, and Zane and Rikki own and run the cafe. There are no other adults involved in running this cafe. It's just 2 high schoolers, which doesn't quite make sense to me. Also, the actors have all aged a little bit, which isn't weird for a kids show, but the show also styles them up a little bit. Like in previous seasons, Cleo and Rikki would always wear these like pigtail braids, but now their hair is like long and loose and voluptuous. Plus, the only parent in the show anymore is Cleo's dad, and the show becomes much less about high school and much more about like navigating career issues and being a mermaid. Okay, now that we have a baseline understanding of the show, let's take a look into why the show was so unique for its time. The most obvious reason that H2O stood out to American viewers is because it was Australian. American audiences have a tendency to view shows from other countries as more mature and cool, and sometimes showrunners even take advantage of this. Like there's a later Nickelodeon show called House of Anubis, which is Nickelodeon trying to be more mysterious and soap opera-y, and House of Anubis takes place in England with British actors but is for all intents and purposes for American audiences. Another show like this is Sex Education, also in England with British actors but is made with American audiences in mind. However, H2O Just Dead Water really was an Australian show that just happened to strike a chord with American audiences. But the show being foreign made isn't the only reason it stood out. When trying to understand the children's television landscape, it's important to know that there are two kinds of TV shows, multicam and single cam. Multicam shows are shot on a soundstage with multiple cameras pointing at the actors, oftentimes with a live audience, though nowadays it's mostly just a laugh track. The majority of children's shows from this time were multicam sitcoms. A couple popular examples are iCarly, Victorious, Drake and Josh, Hannah Montana, Wizards of Waverly Place. Single cam TV shows, on the other hand, are shows that have one camera that's just moved around for different angles. While there are certainly less children's shows from this time that are single cam, there are a few, like Zoe 101, Unfabulous, Ned's Declassified School, Survival Guide. The fact that H2O Just Dead Water was a single cam TV show already set it apart from other shows, and even amongst the few single cam TV shows there were, H2O was the only children's show that was not strictly a comedy. In a 2007 interview, executive producer Jonathan Schiff says that the show was shot on film rather than digitally because film still has a traditional quality drama look, and HD drama hasn't arrived yet in Australia the way it has in America. This term quality isn't about the literal quality of the show, but rather it comes from the term quality television. Quality television is a term that's often used to describe shows like West Wing and Mad Men and Breaking Bad. However, quality television itself is often more defined by its audiences, educated, male, willing to spend money, than by its actual content. Quality TV is often compared to movies. The technical and narrative elements of these shows are actually more similar to the soap opera. But since soap opera is often gendered female and therefore seen less valuable, the term quality TV was coined to separate these more male-centric shows and laud them as innovative and cinematic when in reality they were using techniques that have been around in soap opera for a long time. With a closer look into H2O Just Dead Water, we can see how this show has elements of soap opera and melodrama that were carried into quality TV. H2O, like quality dramas, tells serialized stories. While the show does have a fair amount of episodic content, that is, storylines that are contained to a single episode, it also has a lot of storylines that span across multiple episodes or even the entire season. One quote from television scholar Jane Feward describes the plot lines of soap operas in quality TV as, "It does not simply break down each segment into a standard number of storylines, but rather it attempts to juxtapose, interweave, and orchestrate the plot lines together in a quasi-musical fashion." Let me give you an example of how H2O does this. In Season 1, Episode 8, a marine biologist named Dr. Denman arrives, and Lewis begins to work for her, secretly using her lab equipment to try to study why the girls turn into mermaids. Dr. Denman catches Lewis with a skin sample that turns into a scale, and she becomes immediately intrigued and suspicious of where it comes from. At the end of the episode, Lewis takes the sample back from her and Dr. Denman leaves town. A few episodes later, Zane nearly drowns and is rescued by Emma, who he doesn't recognize because Emma had dyed her hair red, but because there was water in the hair dyeing process, her hair only turns red when she's a mermaid. Zane spends the rest of the season trying to prove that mermaids exist and getting laughed at as deranged and mermaid obsessed. At the end of the season, Dr. Denman returns, and Zane combines what he knows and remembers about the mermaid with what Dr. Denman learned from the sample she stole from Lewis. It is then revealed that Dr. Denman's return to Mako Island was brought about by Zane's father so that Dr. Denman could do an environmental study on Mako Island, which he was going to knock down and develop into condos, which was a major plot point a few episodes previously when Zane brought Rikki to a fancy dinner with his family and Rikki got into an argument with Zane's father about this. Dr. Denman, Zane, and Zane's father then catch photographic proof of the mermaids and try to orchestrate a plan to trap and expose them, Zane still oblivious that the mermaids are his girlfriend and her friends. When Zane finally realizes that the mermaids he's been chasing has been his own peers, he helps the girls escape, and then subsequently return to the moon pool at midnight on a lunar eclipse where they will be turned back into humans forever. It's then revealed at the end of the episode that the lunar eclipse actually only took away the girls' mermaid powers for 12 hours, but they didn't know that, so now no one knows that, and everyone thinks they're human, but they are actually still mermaids, but their secret is still in their hands. And Lewis's hands.
I'm going to pretend I didn't see that.
Excellent, I'll pretend you're interesting.
This style of storytelling, of bringing all of the plot threads together for a grand conclusion, is like that of quality serialized television. And each season of H2O has its own big bad. In season 2, we have Charlotte, who starts out as just trying to steal Lewis from Cleo and breaking up the friend group, but then she turns into a mermaid herself and threatens the girls by possessing all 3 mermaid powers. This season probably has the weakest finale because it ends with Charlotte turning back into a human forever, and instead of retaliating by exposing their secrets or anything, she just kind of goes, well, you got me, and then leaves town. In season 3, the main villain is water tentacles slash the moon trying to warn them about a comet that only the mermaids can stop, and for some reason the best way to communicate this is through tentacles. The show also tries to include some social commentary, especially with environmentalism, because the mermaids are very connected to the ocean. One episode from season 1 follows the girls when they realize that one of the local fishermen has been using illegal fishing nets and endangering sea turtles. It's then revealed that this is actually Cleo's father, and she has to confront her father about this. The show also tries to bring in some socioeconomic commentary through Rikki's character. She lives in a trailer park with her dad, while all the other characters are from well-off upper middle-class families. Beyond just the narrative elements of the show, the technical aspects are also very evocative of soap operas. As mentioned previously, the show was shot on film to give it a more quality drama-like look. This is even done today in shows like Succession, which is also shot on film. Another technical aspect of H2O is the editing style, which is done in a way that really highlights the melodramatic excess. Take, for example, this scene in season 2. Cleo's father forces Cleo to do the dishes while he and her taunting little sister observe. Cleo, aware that if she touches the water she'll turn into a mermaid, approaches the dishes carefully. She slowly reaches her hand into the sink. When the camera cuts, we see Cleo is out of focus in the foreground, with her father lit and in focus in the background, followed by a rack focus back to Cleo before cutting into a medium close-up of her sister Kim staring impatiently. A medium close-up of Cleo staring down and centered in the frame before we cut to a close-up of Cleo's hand inching its way towards the faucet. When the faucet turns on, the camera slowly zooms in on the water before a crossfade cuts to another slow zoom of Cleo's face. Finally, the tension is cut into a wide shot of Cleo running out the door before cutting back to a close-up of Kim shutting off the faucet, reminding the audience one final time of the narrative threat of running water.
She is such a loser.
The way in which the multiple camera angles and close-ups of this one small moment drag it out to increase the tension highlights the melodrama of the scene and fits clearly into the soap opera editing style. Conversely, the majority of children's television shows shot in a single cam format still use primarily static wide shots in order to preserve the comedic elements of the script, and only use varying camera angles and techniques to heighten moments of comedy and parody. The only similarly shot moment to this that I could think of from a children's show from the early 2000s was the season 2 finale of Zoe 101, where Chase finally texts Zoe that he's in love with her, only for Zoe to have left her phone by the fountain, where the vibrations from the text push it into the water, leaving the text permanently unread in a moment of television that is still shot for shot burned into my memory 16 years later. Regardless, while Zoe 101 was a comedy show with occasional dramatic elements, H2O Just Add Water was primarily a drama with occasional comedic elements. The soap opera style cinematography, editing, and music aren't just reserved for particularly dramatic moments, but are featured heavily throughout every episode, making it a true standout among children's TV shows at the time. I think an important part of the series is the way that the mermaid magic could be read as puberty and coming of age, sudden changes that they struggle to explain to their parents, the girls' behavior being linked to the moon's cycles. But the interweaving of mermaid magic into casual teen issues adds a layer of both mysticism and tension, heightening the stories to levels of melodrama. And when you're a kid, particularly the tween age of 8 to 12, that kind of content is so satisfying. In the same way that I loved horror movies as a kid because they made me feel less alone in my anxieties, seeing melodrama on screen provided an outlet where the world that I lived in my head was real. When you're a kid, there's such a dissonance between the real world and how it makes you feel. Things that made us cry or seethe with anger were often minor issues to the adults around us. The drama of H2O gave us a world where the issues really were as dramatic and high stakes as they felt. Just like how the horror genre allows us to tell culturally and personally important stories before the public is ready to discuss them, the mermaid magic of H2O simply provided that extra layer of separation where where we could forget about normal life but still release the tension that it brings us. Perhaps this is why the YA dystopia genre was so popular among young adults. It provided that release valve by displacing adolescent turmoil onto life or death situations. While many Disney Channel and Nickelodeon shows from the 2000s are getting a second life from the fans who grew up watching them as they become available through Disney Plus and Paramount Plus, H2O has lived on Netflix since 2014 with a spin-off series called Mako Mermaids that ran for 3 seasons. While I personally haven't watched all of Mako Mermaids, what I've seen of it is markedly different from the original show. For one, it's shot digitally, giving the series and special effects a drastically different and less realistic look. Additionally, the lore is very different. There's an established mermaid colony on Mako Island rather than just the 3 mermaids, with an entire rules and culture.
You broke so many laws.
We didn't mean to. We didn't want the boy to get powers.
The boy and the island are connected. The pod must leave.
Regardless, the spin-off does keep some of the editing style as well as the music from the original show, although the font for the credits has been changed to Comic Sans, and I don't know why. A second Netflix spin-off called H2O Mermaid Adventures was an animated series with 2 seasons. Mermaid Adventures was clearly produced for a much younger audience than the original show, which is fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But I do hope that somewhere in the vast landscape of children's television, somewhere amidst the competing streaming platforms and broadcast channels, there is a show like H2O that takes both itself and its audience seriously while still providing a lighthearted escapist fantasy that I loved as a kid.